I found a $4,200 charge I didn't recognize. Then another. By the time my accountant finished the audit, the number was over $50,000, stolen from the business. I built from nothing. And the only other person with full access to those accounts was my own mother. This is the story of how I found out my mom had been stealing from me for 3 years. My name is Rachel. 6 years ago, I opened a small bakery with $9,000 in savings and a loan. I was terrified I'd never pay back. My mom, Linda, believed in it before anyone else did. She'd done bookkeeping for 20 years at a hardware store before it closed. And when I needed someone to manage the books, she didn't hesitate. Who else are you going to trust with this besides me? For 6 years, that's exactly what I did. Payroll, vendor payments, taxes, all of it, hers. I focused on baking, staff, customers. Every month she'd hand me a report. I'd glance at the bottom line, and that was it. Why would I look closer? This was my mother. The same woman who co-signed my first loan. The same woman who showed up at 5 a.m. More times than I can count during holiday rushes. My older brother Kevin was never part of the business. He drifted between jobs for years. My mom and I didn't talk about him much. If anything, that made me trust her more. She'd been through enough with him already. The bakery was supposed to be the one simple thing in her life. Everything changed this spring when I decided to open a second location. I applied for an SBA loan, and the bank asked for 3 years of financial records. I forwarded the request to my mom, like always, and figured that was the end of my involvement. 2 weeks later, my loan officer called me directly. She said there were inconsistencies in the vendor, payments she needed clarified, payments to a supplier called Winwood Distribution that didn't match any actual deliveries. I'd never heard that name in 6 years of running this business. I called my mom, expecting a simple explanation. She said it was probably an old vendor, told me not to worry, said she'd handle it with the bank directly. It wasn't what she said. It was how fast she said it, like she already knew the answer before I finished asking the question. I told myself I was overreacting. This was my mother, not some bookkeeper off a job board. But I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, instead of waiting for her to handle it, I quietly hired an outside accountant a friend recommended and asked her to review the last 3 years independently. I didn't fully explain why. Some part of me already knew, and I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. For 10 days I went through the motions, smiled at customers, trained a new hire, sat across from my mom at Sunday dinner and let her talk about her garden like nothing was wrong. The knot in my stomach never went away. The accountant called on a Thursday and asked to meet in person instead of talking over the phone. That was the first moment I let myself believe something was actually wrong. Nobody asks for an in-person meeting over good news. She slid a folder across the table before saying a word. Winwood Distribution wasn't a real vendor. It was a business name registered to a personal address. My mom's address. Over 3 years. More than 140 separate payments had gone out disguised as supply costs. Flour, packaging, equipment repairs. Ordinary enough that I never would have questioned a single one on a monthly report. Total, just over $46,000. I stared at that folder for a long time. My accountant didn't say anything. I think she knew I needed the silence. $46,000. 3 years. The exact 3 years my mom managed every financial detail of a business. I trusted her with completely, no questions asked. Because she was my mother, and because I genuinely believed there wasn't a person on earth less likely to hurt me on purpose. I drove home without turning the radio on once, just doing the math over and over, like it might come out different. I sat on it for 4 days. Part of me kept hoping there was still an explanation that made this make sense. On the 5th day, I drove to her house after close, folder in hand. She opened the door already smiling, asked if I wanted tea. I set the folder on her kitchen table without a word. I watched the exact moment she stopped pretending she didn't know what it was. Rachel. $46,000. Mom. Winwood Distribution is registered to this address. Your address. She didn't argue. She sat down slowly, put her face in her hands. and cried in a way I'd genuinely never seen before. Not at funerals. Not during her divorce. I was going to pay it back, she kept saying. Like repeating it enough times might make it true. I asked the only question that mattered. Why? When she finally looked up, her whole face had changed. It's Kevin, she said quietly. He's in serious trouble. I didn't know what else to do. It came out in pieces. Like she'd been holding it so long she barely knew how to say it all at once. Kevin had been gambling. Not casually, he owed money to. People my mom described as not the kind. You're late paying back. It started small, 4 years ago. Amounts he could cover himself. Then it became thousands he couldn't. Then it became threats. She said Kevin came to her 18 months into managing my books. Terrified, not knowing where else to turn. She made a decision that night she'd been. Regretting and justifying to herself in equal. Measure ever since. Pay it back quietly. Using her own salary, before I ever had to know. Instead, it went on for 3 years. I sat in that kitchen a long time saying nothing. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me, watching my mother sob at her own table, just felt unbearably sad for both of them. I made one decision before I left. She was done handling any part of my business finances, effective immediately. I needed time to figure out what happens next, with her, and possibly with the police. I still don't know if that was the right call. What would you do in my position? Press charges against your own mother? Give her a chance to pay it back quietly? Let me know below. *** Part 2. What happened with Kevin? And what I ultimately decided is coming next. ***.